This session is the first of two designed to examine the role of listening in the construction of an effective communication. The second session will examine how we might improve those listening skills. How good are your listening skills? Rate your skills on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being very poor and 5 being excellent. If you haven't rated yourself a 5, then there's room for improvement. You are missing pieces of conversation, which means missing information, and that information might be key to your gaining a fuller understanding of what it is the other person is trying to say. They might have told you they are allergic to a particular drug. They might have said no, or they might have inserted some doubt into the conversation, but you didn't hear it. As a result, the wrong drug is administered, a misunderstanding develops, or their doubt is ignored, all of which could have been avoided if only your listening skills had been a little better. There are 5 key elements to an effective communication. Understanding body language and listening skills are the other 2. And while we spend years learning and perfecting our speaking, reading and writing skills, we give scant attention to the other 2. We are taught very few rules in relation to listening effectively, other than don't interrupt and stay silent. Effective listening is a skill, and like any other skill, competency is achieved through learning and practice. However, we are faced with a dilemma. Can you write down the name of someone who's a household name because of their ability to listen effectively? Most of us will find this difficult. We can recount a great many people who are great writers and orators, and we may ourselves be avid readers, but try naming someone who's renowned because of their ability to listen. Well, that does pose a challenge. How can people learn to listen effectively if there's no one proficient enough to teach them? In place of the skilled listener, people are forced to emulate those around them, and since these individuals have not been taught the finer points of listening, what is passed on is in effect a skill at its most simplistic and rudimentary level. Every second of the day our senses, sight, sound, touch, smell and taste, bombard our brain with information. For instance, through our eyes we can identify different colours, shapes and sizes. Through our ears we can hear a variety of sounds, their tone, pitch and intonation. And through touch we can determine the texture and density of an object. However, the sheer volume of this information, if allowed to go unfettered, would be enough to put anyone into a catatonic state. The brain has therefore developed an ingenious coping mechanism. It blocks out the vast majority of these signals from entering our consciousness. Think back to the last time you sat in a busy coffee house. Can you remember everything you heard, read, saw or smelt? Of course not. Your brain filtered out information it deemed irrelevant. The background chatter, the stain on the carpet, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, all gone. Well, from your consciousness at least. Some, but not all, will enter your subconscious, to be recounted at a later date if required, while other information will be completely discarded. The information you choose to retain and how that information is interpreted depends upon who you are, and the information someone else chooses to retain depends upon who they are. Each is influenced by their own unique experiences, values and beliefs. It is for this reason that should you give 2 people the same book to read and ask them to summarize that book, you might hear 2 summaries that bear little relation to each other. Remembering how our experiences, values and beliefs influence not only what we recall, but also how we choose to interpret what we recall, let us now turn our attention to a number of key barriers that make listening effectively more difficult than we might first imagine. It is not uncommon for people to take up a position on a matter or issue, to defend that position and attack the other party's position. Their sole aim is to win. Michael Nichols refers to this individual as a competitive conversationalist. Deborah Tannen goes further when she describes the British as inherently adversarial. Tannen refers the reader to three areas of British society: the press, politics and the legal system, to make her point. The press, she contends, is interested only in furthering their own particular point of view rather than providing the reader with a balanced and unbiased account. In politics, she asserts, there are two main political parties shouting down what the other has to say. And our legal system is not about justice, it is about pitting two lawyers against each other. The lawyer with the most persuasive argument wins. Winning is therefore more important than understanding, and this influences how people listen. Some listen for the opportunity to interrupt. It may be a pause, a hesitation, just enough to allow them to interject, allowing them to steer the conversation in their chosen direction. Some listen with a view to detecting a flaw in the other person's argument and using that flaw to advance their own point of view. Others refuse to evaluate dispassionately what the other party has to say. They effectively close their ears to the other party's point of view. Winners, therefore, are those who talk, not those who listen. A person's eyes often distract their ears from hearing what needs to be heard. When we meet someone, it is not uncommon for our eyes to engage that person, followed by our ears. Our eyes are taking in a variety of information: their height, the expensive watch they are wearing, the colour of their clothes, and so forth. They may even find themselves engaged in a conversation with themselves, for example, critiquing the person's choice of clothes, and fail to hear the other person give their name. Just as people seem drawn to watch a television anywhere in close proximity, they also find themselves being drawn against their will to irrelevant background chatter. One study reported by D. Jones found that background chatter could reduce a person's performance by 2/3. Indeed, irrelevant chatter is particularly disruptive to processes involving memory, such as reasoning, mental arithmetic, and problem solving. This disruption to a person's concentration can result in information being missed or misunderstood, which may have unintended consequences, including the deterioration or complete breakdown in relations. Owen Hargey suggests that the average individual talks at a speed of approximately 150 words per minute. However, they think at approximately 600 words per minute. Thinking 4 times faster than people can talk means our brain is forced to receive information at an extremely slow pace when compared to its capabilities. This partially explains why people are poor listeners. Because words are being delivered at an extremely slow pace, people have a tendency to jump ahead of what is being said, which causes them to interrupt. They may feel they have heard enough, and they feel they are able to anticipate what the other party is about to say, hence the interruption, which is designed to save time. Or because they can think faster than a person can talk, they use that time to think of a question relevant to the general topic under discussion, but not necessarily relevant to what was actually being said. People can remain attentive for about 40 minutes. At least that is what Duckett and Cornish suggest. William R. Cheney contends that an adult's attention span wanes after about 20 minutes. A survey by Lloyd's TSB Insurance in the 1990s suggests this is overly generous. Their findings suggest anything between 12 and 15 minutes. Interestingly, 10 years later, their research implies that this has dropped significantly to just over 5 minutes. The implications are all too obvious. Lack of focus can mean missing key information, misinterpreting what has been said, and misunderstanding the intentions of the other party. Ian Mackay contends that within 48 hours of hearing a 10-minute oral presentation, a person will remember roughly 10% of what they have been told. The brain is like a sieve, unable to retain information for any length of time. To compensate for this weakness, people tend to select and remember elements of a message which they deem important, and what information people select and how that information is interpreted, as we know, may not be identical. Hence the reason for misunderstandings and miscommunications. We have reviewed how our brain copes with all the information it is bombarded with, and how we interpret information based on our experiences, values and beliefs, and how our interpretation may differ from that of another person. We then went on to review 6 barriers to listening effectively. The first is based upon the adversarial culture that permeates British society. The need to win, as opposed to understand, is perhaps the least appreciated but most important reason for our listening skills to be less than optimal. The second describes how a person's hearing is often distracted by what their eyes are seeing. The third considers how our ears can be distracted by background chatter. The fourth relates to the fact that we think faster than we talk, and often means people jumping ahead of what has been said, which can lead to misunderstandings and miscommunications. The fifth relates to the steady decline in people's attention span. And finally, people are selective in what they remember, discarding 90% of the information they received within 48 hours. None of these operate in isolation. They combine to make a skill which is often taken for granted incredibly difficult to master. This concludes Session 1, but before you undertake Session 2 and learn how to improve your listening skills, can I urge you to reinforce what you have learned by undertaking the short quiz which follows. You will also find a reading list after the quiz which you may find of interest.